Christopher Duncan is with us here today. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, yeah. Now, can you just describe to us, first of all, what it is that you do? Because it's quite complicated stuff, isn't it?
Uh, yeah, a little bit. So, oddly enough, I just found out this morning as well that I was given a promotion and not told about it. But I am the I work for a company called Raytheon, and I'm the now associate director of RF systems. So that's radio frequency systems, and that's everything from handheld to like radios or Wi-Fi and things like that to some of the things that traditionally aren't um, associated or thought of as radio frequency in like uh, low frequency low frequency emissions from the earth and stuff like that, which is also plays into my education.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of stuff that's included in radio frequency that you don't really think about because a lot of things run on frequencies in the air, not just radio as in the thing you listen to.
Yeah, so it's really radio frequency. That term by itself it's kind of a artifact. In reality, what it is the electromagnetic spectrum. The radio frequency is just a small
Yeah.
piece of that, usually used only for radio transmissions or TV. But these days, it's kind of no longer I don't know. It's no longer at least in my perspective, it's no longer a term that's used very much.
Yeah.
All the way down. I mean, you've got the amount of things that are now outside of your typical, quote unquote, radio frequency area it's incredible.
Yeah,
All the way
yeah.
up to gigantic space transmissions and or transmitters and things like that, all the way down to really low frequency things. Everything has some type of radio frequency signature.
Yeah, absolutely. And up at the top of the spectrum, you've got all this gamma rays and stuff, and you can fight cancers and all sorts. It's so diverse what all these waves can do.
Yeah, when explaining that kind of stuff, I like to sort of do it on a scale.
Yeah.
So all the way on one side, you've got super, super low frequency, and all the way on the right side or the other side, you've got really, really high frequency.
Mm.
There's sort of a cutoff point just above visible light that they start to become more and more dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, they also they have higher levels of bandwidth for carrying data,
Yeah.
and you can do more things with them as far as there's modulation techniques with effectively figures out a way to send two signals at the same time using the negative of the waves, or like if you imagine a wave kind of going up at its peak.
Yeah.
So you also transmit one and it's down at its peak at the same time, and so they kind of opposite each other. So you can fit two into the same transmission. And then all the way on the other side, it's really, really low frequency. Those things are not really at all dangerous. We're blanketed in them all the time.
Yeah.
And that's where the anomalies that I research in my academic career kind of occur. And you get stuff that's, some of it's from the core of the earth.
Yeah.
The movements of the magma and the core, emitting waves and all these other things we really have yet to sort of discover. And that's really not helpful for data transmission because it's so low bandwidth, but it's interesting nonetheless. There's other things going on.
Yeah, and is that how noise cancelling headphones work as well? You have two identical sound waves and they kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah. So basically what you're talking about is there's some type of processor in there. It picks up that, the baseline noise on the exterior is whatever sort of wave pattern X, and that transmit the opposite, and they effectively become nullified to your ear.
Yeah.
They're still there, but you just don't pick them up.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it quite fun, the work that you do?
That's a creative way to describe it.
Yeah.
Fun is a broad word. Some days, yeah, it is. I really like being on the sort of cutting edge or problem solving side of things.
Hmm.
Um, there are days when I actually go like hands on with a engineering design and get to just absolutely full force say, oh, why was it done this way? Let's change it to this, this, and this,
Yeah.
and then realize, whatever amount of speed or cost savings or risk savings. Um, and those days are really, really good, because sometimes all legacy or all people need who have been doing a job for a long time is an outside, like fresh perspective.
Yeah.
Um, and so sometimes I get to provide that, or sometimes I'm just knocking down really easy, close range sort of goals, that may not seem easy to people who have been in the same position for 5 years or more.
Yeah.
Those are the days I feel the best and I enjoy it. Then there are days when I'm bombarded in Microsoft Excel
Mm.
uh, hell, and basically doing financials and um, taking raw data of finances and
Mm.
displaying them 15 different ways for 12 different people, and those are not fun days.
Yeah. And can it be quite hard as well because the work sounds complicated and you have to understand a lot of sciencey things? Or is it just that because you understand it and have been doing it for a long time, it just comes naturally to you now?
No, it's still hard. Like I think every week there's a moment where I just stopped and put my head in my hands.
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's some of these things don't get easier no matter how long you've been doing them. They're just unique problems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think a lot of people in lots of jobs will tell you at least once a week they put their head in their hands, especially teachers, probably.
Yeah, yeah, I would, without a doubt, that's got to be one of the more trying career fields as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go right back to the start and to your early life. Whereabouts were you born?
So I was born in rural Missouri, which is like right in the center of the Midwest, and I
Mm.
was born right in the center of the state in a incredibly small town
Mm.
named Eldon, Missouri. So that's Eldon for the Googlers. I think when I left town, it had like 4,000 people in it, which was a big sort of increase. And I think last time I went through, it was like 4,000 people.
Wow. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
small.
yeah, and 30 minutes from everything. So the nearest big sort of city, or what I would call place of employability, was like 30-minute drive,
Yeah.
with no traffic.
Mm. And just a little bit off topic, but something I realized recently, why is Kansas City in Missouri? Surely it should be in Kansas.
Yeah, no, I think half of it is, and I think part of it is in Kansas.
Ah, right,
I
okay.
believe there is a little bit of Kansas City, Kansas, and then there's Kansas City, Missouri.
Bit confusing that it's half and half. You should think the city you're going to name Kansas City should be somewhere in the middle, presumably, not sharing with another place.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of decisions that were made out there are kind of confusing to the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what was your early life like then?
Oh, colorful.
Yeah.
Kind of typical sort of um, Midwest troubled household, one
Mm.
parent working. So I my parents divorced at an early age of like, I think I was 2 if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Went to stay with my mom, uh, and who had essentially no sort of um, tangible sort of skills,
Yeah.
and hopped to retail jobs, and just working in very simple retail or factories on production lines, or um, uh, or found support in who she was dating at the time. Those kind of things. Coming up that way was probably a big influence. It was also very sort of there was an element of being. It was a very physically abusive household as well for my brothers and I,
Yeah.
and I think some of that was drug related, and yeah. So that's the first couple of years. Um,
Yeah. And the abuse, was it on you or was it a parent that was being abused?
it was primarily me. As I was the oldest brother,
Yeah.
so she left my father when I was 2, and she had just had my brother. Uh, so yeah, so my brother that's 2 years younger than me, from the same parents. Yeah, and so as the oldest, I kind of caught most of the wrath being expected, sort of from an early age to, fill the role of the typical male role in a household.
Yeah, absolutely. And were you particularly interested in science things as a child, or I suppose maybe your job is something that might not have exactly existed back then?
Yeah, I don't, not 100% sure it existed, but I always was. So I was a, it was an interesting sort of paradox. So at school, I was constantly transferred back and forth to, like, they would do the annual national placement tests. I would end up being placed in gifted science and math. Um, and then because of home problems, which led to behavioral problems, I would be dropped down um, to like a remedial level,
Mm.
and would then quickly realize, like, this kid is beyond remedial level. He needs to go up. And I'd find myself back in like gifted classes, and that effectively repeated for my entire school time. And then at home, like, I found my best sort of retreat from things going on, and also where my interest lied is I would sort of, whenever I could, isolate into my own room a little bit, and I was always digging into electronics. Like, I would always, some kind of toy where it was like a remote control car or something like that.
Yeah.
It was within the first week of having it, I'd taken it apart, figured out what made things work,
Mm.
and would start pulling out the motor or the computer boards or whatever, and then trying to sort of Frankenstein them into something else.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Does that get quite complicated? Because I reckon even if I took some machinery apart, I would see it all, but I still wouldn't have any idea how it actually works. It's just all wires to me.
Yeah, that was part of the problem. Is once you get to the point of needing a computer board,
Yeah.
you really need some books or formal education in it. I did manage to find a bunch of sort of electronic and computer programming books. One of our family friends was going through a divorce and moved some of his boxes of stuff in. Being a nosy, I think 13-year-old at the time, I dug through some of the boxes, and he had a small book on, I think it was physics and the electromagnetic spectrum, and then a book on computer programming, which I promptly stole and began learning that until the day came that I had a computer.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were younger, did you feel that you had any particular role models or anyone that was looking out for you in particular?
Um, Not a lot of transient figures were very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the typical pattern was when my father was paying extra support for my brother and I, then beyond what was required, then he got to see us regularly, like I think 2 weekends a month.
Um,
When he didn't, then we were effectively withheld by my mom as like a sort of a pawn in the game
yeah.
to get more money. And sometimes that went on for, 18 months to 2 years at a time. And then on the home side, really it was whoever my mom was seeing or became friends with. And even
Mm.
at like a young age, you start noticing like patterns
Mm-hmm.
of moving, making a lot of friends.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about her, like making a lot of friends and the best, and the best friends, and becoming the most popular. And then suddenly all these friends start having these little disagreements and realizing that you know, maybe she's not the best friend, these
Yeah.
kind of, and then they always like sort of disappear. And no, in those times before they sort of disappeared, we had sort of a mentor and things like that, or someone at least to talk to, or looking out for you. And
Mm.
then suddenly it was everyone's fault. They were just horrible people, and it was time to move again. In the local area, I did have a teacher that made a big impact on me in fifth grade.
Yeah.
And she realized something was going on at home, and would keep me after school 2 or 3 days a week, and make sure I got home.
Yeah.
She did a couple of things for me, really. She kind of let me do my own thing.
Mm.
So at the time, I was really heavy into Greek mythology and sort of the various historical stuff about Greece
Yeah.
and bios of Alexander the Great and all that. So I was spending a lot of time getting up and going to the encyclopedia and looking up things. And so she basically said, just move your desk by the encyclopedia bookshelf. So I did. And then she would, at the end of the day, she would bring me like a sheet of paper that had all the critical stuff from the day that I needed to do and know. I would do those things real quick. Uh, but then for the rest of the day, I was allowed to sort of read
Mm.
whatever I wanted. I ended up actually in fifth grade reading the entire encyclopedia and memorizing the Greek alphabet. It was like,
Wow.
yeah, the encyclopedia would have like A, and then it would have the Greek letter A, and then whatever Sanskrit and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I just ended up learning the Greek alphabet.
Yeah. That's quite impressive. A lot of kids are like that. They try and find out everything they can about a particular subject and everything.
Yeah, and she would pull me aside and say like, "Hey, is everything going okay?"
Yeah.
Taking the right cues. Even then, I knew like this is stuff you keep your mouth shut about,
Yeah.
because where we had eventually settled about this time was
Mm.
just outside of that town of or of Eldon, and the quote unquote farm where they kept all the kids who were taken away or in foster care was a quarter mile down the road, and it was a family who had decided that their source of income was going to be raising foster kids. So they put like 5 trailers on a couple acres of land, and they were just full of kids. And that was never a good. I don't know anyone from those type of situations that were either happy or turned out super happy.
Yeah.
Not to say they don't exist, but I don't know anyone, and I certainly didn't want to end up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And in school, how does it work in America? Do you get to choose the subjects that you do? Because that's what we do here.
Um, Toward the end, yeah, the
Yeah.
last 4 years in high school, the first year, I think you pick like one or two, and then toward the end, you get more freedom with it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's pretty much the same here. So, what ones did you pick? Were yours kind of related to the career you do now, or was it more broad?
Um, at first, they sort of were like I picked a lot of um, science
Yeah.
course, like a physical science course, and I'm trying to remember now some physical sciences, a little bit of I think math,
Yeah.
and then sort of I came to this point where I had basically like my opinion at the time was this is dumb. Um, I felt a little different from my peers, and not in the sense of like I'm a smarter, superior person. I
Mm.
felt like, you know, I knew on the bigger picture, a lot of this stuff wasn't going to be a significant thing in my life. And why am I sitting here? Um, and then combine that with more stuff going on at home, I changed the plan and began working on easier courses and attending school during the summer so I could leave early.
Ah. And did you have any career in mind at that point and what you wanted to do?
Well, at the time, so at 16, I basically made my first attempt at running away from home.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to leave quick. So I decided, like a lot of Americans do who want to get away quick, is to join the armed forces.
Oh.
Yeah, a couple of failed attempts at running away. Ended up in, yeah. So there was. I'll just explain the story a little bit. There was. I was at the time. Now I had four brothers, younger brothers. I was the oldest. I was about 16. I was watching all of them, and one of them had gotten like hurt. And it was pretty normal for me to come home from school with all them, get them all settled, start doing things like making dinner, doing the dishes, and basically the household work until my mother got home around 8 or 9 p.m. and and watch all them, and then turn around and get them ready for school and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
One of them had gotten hurt. I can't remember. They were like, playing a rough housing and bit the inside of their cheek or something. It wasn't, hospital worthy or doctor worthy. And then they came home and it basically just exploded with the gentleman she was married to at this time. And it just turned into like a straight up brawl with me. The difference was at this point I had enough. So at one point I was basically thrown down a flight of stairs, and at the bottom was a baseball bat, which I then grabbed and retaliated. And then she had this weird thing where she would grab, and these are the old phones, like the phones with the gigantic cords on them, and they had the big magnetic speakers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah, and she would always threaten, excuse me, and say, "Do you want to call somebody? Do you want to call your father? Do you want to call CPS?" And then when you got close enough, then the phone just basically whacked you upside the head and became a weapon. And so this time I basically came at her like I was going to swing at her. She got scared, dropped the phone. I caught it, called my father, said, meet me in town. I'm out of here. Click. Drove off as I had worked full time when I could most of my high school career when I wasn't stuck at home with kids, so that I always had money saved, and had bought a car. And then basically I barely knew my father, so he had a girlfriend. And so instead, after various attempts to run away and all this, he more or less just rented me a small apartment in the town he lived in, and I lived there on my own. And then I decided I wanted to leave early, ran away and rented my own place, and got a roommate, another friend from school. It was walking distance from school. And started taking, instead of taking trigonometry or advanced math, I took like how to balance a checkbook, things like that, to the point where my senior year was, I think I took one art class and that was it. And I was done for one semester, and forged some paperwork and was shipped off into the Air Force.
Oh, wow. And what kind of stuff did you do in the Air Force? Were you in harm's way, or were you kind of doing other things?
I was certainly in harm's way, but not from like a combat zone perspective. But I was an aircraft mechanic. So I was in school for about 6 months, 7 months, just to learn how to fix airplanes. And ended up overseas in Germany for,
Ooh.
which was, more beg, borrowing, and stealing on my part. Some guy I didn't know had, his orders to Germany, and they were trying to send me to Arkansas, which is right below Missouri, and that's like the
Yeah.
last, like, get me out of here kind of thing. So ended up doing like 4 swaps of assignments just to get an assignment in my hand, like a Pokemon card that he wanted,
Yeah.
uh, and then ended up getting it and going to Germany.
Wow. And whenabouts was this? What years were you in Germany?
2000 to 2004.
Ah, and what were you working on there? Because what was going on in Germany back then?
There are a lot of basically U.S. Posts around Germany that
Ah,
are legacy from like World War II era,
yeah.
um, and there are a lot of sort of cooperation and NATO support kind of
Mm,
things. So I was assigned to a maintenance squadron and working on heavy aircraft
yeah.
when I wasn't in trouble.
Mhm. And was that kind of enjoyable? Because I think a lot of people say it's like a journey to find yourself being in the Air Force and the Army and things. Is it kind of like an adventure?
Um, I don't know that I would capture it that way. I
Yeah.
would call it a catalyst.
Mm,
um,
yeah.
uh, the work itself sometimes was enjoyable. I do very clearly remember some really beautiful days in Germany,
Yeah.
sitting on top of the wing of an airplane, like doing some work by myself,
Wow.
unbothered, you know. But I still the same predicament. Like I found myself not quite fitting in and not knowing why. Like
Yeah.
just thinking like, all right, yeah, this is great. I'm doing this, but why am I doing this? There are other things I could be doing, and I don't know what those other things are. And
Yeah.
all these people around me can think about as a small little task thing, but what else could we do? And yeah, that's a good. Didn't do a lot of self discovery as a result of
Yeah.
my time in, but my time in was a catalyst to sort of put me there.
Yeah. And is that how you maybe got into the kind of engineering side of things by fixing planes?
No, not at all. Yeah, no, farthest from it. Oddly enough, I would think that would be, but no. Um, no, so I finished up my time there, and I just stayed. Like I
Yeah.
went home back to the U.S. to do all the out processing and things like that, and then I just flew back. Like I was
Mm.
seeing someone at the time, like another like quote unquote like love of my life, local girl, and moved back, and was staying with her, but it presented a problem of like legality
Yeah.
as a and and things like that. Just money not being employable, being legal in the country. I was still a tourist now.
Yeah.
So I did what any like reasonable person would do, and went back on to the post where I was working and just started walking around and inquiring about jobs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so ended up getting a job as a on the civilian side as like a clerk,
Ooh.
um, and started in the civil service that way, um, which led to the remaining few years in Germany, and then uh, transferring to Holland after that.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, but at the same time, so all that's sort of the material side that's going. But personally, like this is the point where I'd been overseas for 4 or 5 years, and things were starting to surface. Like, there was a lot of trauma bubbling up, realizing that, I was processing things different than others, from that perspective,
Mm.
which led to a lot of what I call now unplanned rapid trauma therapy.
Ooh.
What all I needed to do was, or all I ended up doing, not knowing, being 21 or 22, alone in the country. At this time, I had like broken up with that girl I moved back with and had my own apartment. I didn't know what to do, and I was waking up in sweats all the time and screaming like from screaming like what we now would be like very clearly that's post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Then it was kind of like just really crappy night's sleep, and that was happening regularly. And I had this like country apartment on a hill right next to like a barn, so like the neighbor's donkey would wake me up every morning, um, which was, some people would say that's annoying. I enjoyed it a little bit. And I just remember I woke up one time and I was just like, I gotta stop, man. I've got to drop all this. And I didn't know what that meant, but I was like, I just gotta let all this stuff go. And for whatever reason, I decided so while serving, I was 100% not the athlete on purpose. Very, edgy counterculture on purpose kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I did not stay in shape. And then I decided I was just going to like run. So I probably hadn't run in 2 years, and I just threw on some shoes and stepped out and just started running. And the village I lived on was on like a ridge. So there was a trail, and on both sides of the trail were steep drop-offs that you could easily roll down and break something. And I just kind of went on for miles, and I just started running and would forget about distance and everything else, and was processing all this stuff and getting like really into the deep sort of emotional side of it, the deep thoughts of it.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Holland, and there's no hills there.
Oh no, absolutely not. It's all under the sea level.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what kind of work did you do there then?
So initially, this is within my first, like, I think 2 years of civil service. So I was still a clerk there. There was basically a shipping port agency. And I kind of collaborated a little bit with like customs because a lot of the stuff going to the U.S. was there.
Yeah.
Some shipping, like a lot of it was honestly household goods for other military, personnel in and around Europe. Would come through the port of Rotterdam at the time. I don't think they do that anymore, but and so I did a lot of just boring clerical work. And I lived in this. I'm trying to think I think it was like a 50-meter squared apartment, like really tiny,
Wow.
really, really tiny. And Holland is not a cheap, well, compared to the Midwest, nowhere in Europe is cheap to live, but
Yeah.
Holland is not a cheap place to live. And I was, eating rice and hot sauce in a bowl to get by. And then the U.S. Embassy in The Hague had, I think it was every 2 weeks, they would cash checks or basically send the check to the bank for processing. And they had that date on there that said checks will be processed on this date. And to get my money in euros, I had to go to the embassy, write a check, and they would convert it. And I was floating checks. So I knew it would be 4 weeks before they cashed it. I only had $100, but I would get paid on Tuesday. So I'd have a second check. And so I would write a check for all of it and in euros and float checks and stuff. And then eventually hard work started paying off. And also failures of others started paying off. A few people above me ended up getting like fired. And I was just the guy that was there who did anything. And so I got promoted. And over a period of 5 years, ended up becoming a director of an office there,
Wow.
which was interesting, coming from a clerk. And still living in the same apartment, but making probably 2 to 3 times what I was when I started.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you feel like that was work that you wanted to do just then, or was it kind of like, well, I have to do this to get a job?
No, I did not want to do it.
Yeah.
In fact, I went through this like slump where I processed a lot of stuff, come to the resolution that, you know what, this is it. I'm independent now. Like, I'm my own person. And then it just kind of like, there's nothing else. from a career, what kept me entertained from a career perspective was I was constantly, very short term or, quick promotions. So there was an achievement thing, there was a next goal to hit.
Yeah.
And then that stopped because I was a director and there was nowhere else to go really there. So I got into this slump where I was, it was kind of like a depression. There was nothing else for me to really achieve at work. It was just showing up and maintaining. So sometimes I would just not even turn on an alarm and just go in whenever I woke up and then leave early. And so I just started traveling a lot more.
Yeah.
Ended up in Australia for about 3 months. Traveled around Estonia, Italy, just driving. I think one time I drove to the border of Spain and then turned around.
Yeah. Is it nice to see the world?
Yeah, sleeping in a rented smart car in church parking lots. Now I'm 6'4", so
Wow.
a smart car is actually to me is a very dumb car because it's a bad decision to rent one
Yeah.
at that height. But yeah, did a lot of those kind of things, and eventually they said, "Hey, it's time for you to move back to the U.S."
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I got another phone call, and it was, "If you stay for 6 more years, we'll move you to Italy and give you another promotion."
Oh.
And so I was like in this dilemma, and that call came as the movers were coming into my apartment to start packing boxes. And the only person I had sort of kept at all in touch with was my brother that was 2 years younger than me and my father. And that was a big, there was a bit of a resentment there because I had moved overseas at 18. And once I had ran away and got settled, I kind of told people where I was and that was it. And then it was really a one-way communication kind of thing. No one called me ever, no one ever wrote a letter, no one ever did. But if I called, they would talk. But otherwise, it was just silence. But I tried, okay, let's forget about that. Let's grow a relationship with my father. And I called him, and he basically said, you've been away from home for over 9 years. Another 6 would be 15. That's a long time. You're going to have to settle sometime. And that was the guilt trip that said, all right, I'll move back. And then they packed up all my stuff and I moved to New Jersey. Not by choice, that's just where they assigned me. And then they were like, we don't, great job, you're an admin guy. We've got some technology sort of development stuff. We need somebody who is capable of running projects. I said, well, I think I'm able to do that. Why not? Let's try it. What are you gonna do? Fire me? So I took on those roles. Ended up doing those kind of things. Lived in New Jersey for 2 years, and then they moved me to Maryland. But it was close enough to other states that I lived in Pennsylvania because it was closer or cheaper, and it was still a 20 to 30-minute drive to get to work.
Yeah.
And started learning, I found myself surrounded by engineers and scientists, doing from the mundane to just really cool stuff. And that's kind of where I got on this path.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you end up doing this exact work that you do now?
Yeah, so I had two key people in my life, and one was a guy that, at the time, one was a guy I'd met in Germany, and he kind of took on this almost fatherly role. He realized what was going on. I was dealing with a lot of junk, and he was always encouraging me, look, you need to start expanding or get an education. So a lot of major U.S. institutions will send professors over to these larger size military posts, and you can apply for college, and then you've got a semester where there are like 5 professors there teaching set classes, and you hope and pray that fits into a degree program.
Yeah.
So I ended up studying a little bit of computer science there. Well, a little bit, like 2.5 years at night school, computer science, and then when I came home, I ended up working for a guy named Dr. Snail, who's a physicist, with a PhD in physics, and was a really, really, really out of the box thinker. Not in the typical like crazy physicist way, but in the like very open to ideas, and he saw a lot of potential in me. And he basically was like, you need to finish, like you need to finish this. So I ended up finishing a degree in computer science, even though I by this time I hated computer science. Never wanted to write another piece of code in my life. And then I essentially became the actual full program manager for some of these kind of programs. And then the world sort of started opening up a lot because people started realizing, with the way I thought about things of, all right, I get our mission is to do whatever, develop, a new airplane. But if you thought about like this would really make it cool or something, those kind of things. That kind of thinking and being around the right people who were supportive or a very strong like counterweight to me, as they used to say, chasing butterflies, really balanced a lot of things and opened up like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can. And I started, I was always in a position of fake it till you make it kind of employment. Always was, in my opinion, suffered from being severely underqualified, but for some reason, people around me knew and trusted me. So they would give me responsibility. I would learn it, and then I would adapt, be very well at it. And then they'd promote me again, and it would happen again. And it came to a point where I was managing a portfolio of technology programs. Like, I had something like 18 program managers under me in the civil service. And I had some ideas. By this time I had gone and got a master's degree in space systems. And I had some ideas. I'm sketching these things out on paper, like it'd be really cool if we did a radar on this, or we did this, or if we leverage this, we could probably make space launching a little more affordable. And I just wasn't getting anything to stick. Like, they were really good ideas. The chief engineer was very impressed. Like, this is awesome. Good idea. But when it came down to it, everyone was like, yeah, but you're a program manager, so go manage programs, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I started asking around about, new jobs. By this time I had maxed where you could go in the civil service. So in the US, the civil service is on a scale, it's 1 to 15. 1 is, minimum wage. Those guys are operating cash registers at grocery stores, at federal installations, and 15 is, that's director level stuff. Those are the guys you see running around the Pentagon half the time. And I was a 15. And further, I was like maxed out at 15 on my pay scale because I had various achievements and stuff. Yeah. And the private sector came calling and said, what do you think? And I kind of told them some of my ideas. And instead of just them saying, yeah, but you're a program manager, go, they said, yeah, we'll do that. Like, if you want room to play, we'll give you a budget and everything. And then a salary that also was unbeatable. So I wrote a really sort of snarky resignation letter and left the civil service after 15 years. And I believe it actually said, I'm leaving to go work at Raytheon where my talents will be greater or better utilized.
Yeah. I mean, you say that you felt underqualified and you mainly got the jobs because people trusted you, but I don't know. I think maybe everyone feels that way, in a way that they don't deserve to be where they've got, and maybe they do.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it was always for me. It was always, and it still is. There's a lingering voice of, and it's some of this inner messaging. Like we as people, we're a weird species, man. We get a
Yeah.
message in our head early on, and that message might be you're not good enough, or you'll never be, or you'll never do whatever,
Yeah.
and it just sticks. And then I'm in a position where going through all this, my education was always catching up to the requirements to be in the job, not I wasn't a guy with an engineering degree that got a job as an engineer. I was a guy who had engineering aptitude and got an engineering position on the premise that I was really close to finishing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing, like it sort of has permeated through even like hobbies and all the other things in my life.
Yeah.
It's just a strange place to be.
Yeah. And you're a member of Astrum Argenteum as well.
Yeah, Astrum Argentum. That's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I am. Next, no. Yeah, I'm guessing you want some elaboration on that.
Yes.
So yeah, a part of this whole thing, I said the catalyst wasn't the military. All they did was put me in a geographic spot, and
Yeah.
a lot of teach me what I didn't want to be a part of, or what I didn't, how I didn't want to see the world or think. But I was always like struggling for this sort of universal, identity of where I fit. Coming in a household that I described also had these overtly oppressive and manipulative sort of religious beliefs where it was, you can't say anything or do anything about this because God says this or whatever. It was like the up and down of we're gonna, there was one summer where I had broken bones in my right and left hand, the small little bones from your knuckle to your wrist. And my punishment was I wasn't allowed to see a doctor. And I just dealt with not having full use of my hands for the year while they healed,
Yeah.
or the summer while they healed. But the thing is that, yeah, it sucks. You broke those. We need to go back to church to get right and start over. Now, looking back, that's insane. But when you're 13 or 14, you don't have a lot of options. So nothing really fit. Like one of the studies I took was I did a lot of, in like a minor when I was doing all these night classes, was into religion and stuff. Found myself, I actually was a practicing Tibetan Buddhist for a while I kind of processed through a lot of trauma throughout in Holland. And then eventually found it still didn't quite like stick. I moved, I had my sort of spiritual practice.
Yeah.
I had my certain like way of thinking. And then as I started exploring more, I found sort of the philosophy of, Thelema. And then for everyone who's going to Google that, like, don't like do some objective research. There's a lot of just, it's the current target of all the conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. But it's basically a philosophy that, we each have our own sort of predestined or predestination will or purpose in life. Our goal should be to live that and only that, and to treat others, 100% equal, without regard to race, sex, gender identity, or anything like that. It's sort of a universal tolerance. The quote is like, we're infinitely tolerant, save for intolerance, kind of thing. And our only sort of deviation from the one directive of, find out what your purpose is enabling others to live their will without discrimination and stuff like that. One of those sort of organizations that implements that is I call it, or most people call it, the AA, not to be confused with the self-help group.
Yep. Or the breakdown cover in the UK that we have.
Yeah, that as well. Has nothing to do with drinking alcohol or breakdowns. but the intent is basically, regardless of your, your background religion, you can keep that or not. The intent is basically a series of achievable and measurable milestones to achieve what they call as K&C, or knowledge and conversation with whatever you define your higher power to be. So for some people, it's a purely psychological thing, becoming, knowledge of your inner self. A Christian-based thing would be knowledge and conversation with like a guardian angel or God himself, those kind of things. And you start this off with a heavy minimum. So for most of them, to even get into this, you have to have, evidence of having undergone like a year of independent counseling, all those kind of things. It's really strong. They'll tell you just don't, like, there's easier ways to find where you belong in the world. Do a very long period of study on the world's religions and sort of the methods, like different types of meditation found in different religions, and all the tools and methods of everything. And then you pass like a written test showing you have knowledge, and then you slowly begin like a sort of twofold path, one of learning and practicing all these various tools that vary from the mundane to the very strange, to sort of put them in your arsenal to get those answers. And on the other side, working on yourself through, sort of directed independent counseling, as well as like, journal every day, doing a lot of Jungian sort of shadow and other personality, subconscious, sort of digging out all that stuff that you've been processing and laying it flat and being okay with it, while at the same time you're, meditating for an hour or whatever. And then as you progress through it, and you move closer and closer, whether it's you're working on your intuition or it all becomes testable. Like you can't, unlike, well, for example, Catholicism, the Pope got there, but on some level, there's some missing tangible sort of things.
Yeah.
In the AA, you can't go anywhere until you're like legitimately, tested. Like, okay, so you've mastered the sort of deep introspection of meditation. So I want you to sit in front of me and meditate for an hour, and we're going to put a bowl of water on your head, and none of that better spill. And then when you can show me you can do that, then we'll start working on the next thing. Those kind of things. Or, you've worked on your intuition for a year. Here's a deck of cards. You'd better be able to predict the suit, spade, heart, diamond, or club, almost 50% of the time after they're shuffled before you flip it over, if you're so intuitive, kind of thing.
Yeah. And do you feel like you have made it in your career, or do you still feel like you're going to go on another journey and progress even more?
More's coming. I like what I do, but unfortunately, I've put myself in a box.
Yeah.
I make too much to just up and leave, but I also work too much to stay. There are a lot of nights where I work till sometimes midnight.
Wow.
So I think my next step is probably going to be stepping out on my own and making, starting a business of some type.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Your own business.
A little risky, but we'll see. There's some niche areas out there that might be a little less saturated than others I can probably jump into.
Yeah, and I guess it's a fun project to have.
Fun doing, probably not fun paying for.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. But, if you make lots of money from it, then yes, it will be fun paying for.
Yeah, in the long run.
Yeah. Well, is there anywhere we're able to keep up to date with you at all?
Yeah. So I wasn't, initially I didn't really want to go down the social media road.
Yeah.
But I do have a very small Twitter account that I kind of keep updated personally and professionally. Right now it's on private, but if somebody wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to. I'll probably open it back up soon.
Yeah.
I've been going through some personal stuff, so I just kind of locked it up. But the ad is it's actually I'll say it, then I'll spell it out. It's LOL Serious Business, and that is spelled LOLSRSBSNS. So
Oh.
yeah, it meant to be entirely just non-serious.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's a bit of an oxymoron, lol, serious.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been very interesting to talk to you and great to have you on.
Yeah, it's been great. I'm normally not even up at this time, but in fact usually I'm just now getting up. But this is a good start to the day.